Deleted Session, June 30, 1973. Now, good evening. This small episode this evening is an excellent example of your joint behavior and beliefs. Noise to you personally is a symbol for all of life's distractions. You are then particularly sensitive in that area. Any discussion between you is at two levels then, where sound of an unpleasant nature is involved. Robert, in his own way, recognizes the charge behind what you say. Sound to him does not have the same meaning, though he may dislike the noise. He interprets your remarks, therefore, as and against distractions in general, recognizing your symbolism. And this makes him uneasy because in his own life, he has taken the steps he has to cut down distractions. He becomes more afraid of them as you speak in such a way. And through your attitude, as he interprets it, the distractions seem more threatening. Now give us a moment. Both papers he has done on beliefs. Rob noted this week. They said apply as beliefs, the one involving you and today's. He is correct. The beliefs behind these were quite applicable and helpful to a youthful personality. His writing, as much as art does, sprang from periods of deep thinking, isolation, and involved strong tendencies to go inward more or less alone. Creative people, if they succeed at all, often find themselves in a position where they feel that the precious inward isolation is threatened. Demands are then made by the outside world that were not made easier. The inward work ends up causing them to relate to a physical world when they believed that their duty was to shut themselves off from that world. Robert's set of beliefs for some time were so invisible, and he identified with them so completely, that it was extremely difficult for him to examine them in the light of the present and his now situation. The paper written today should be discussed by both of you so that those ideas are brought completely into the open, where he can consciously and intellectually examine them. Your emotions follow your beliefs. For many reasons then, he was convinced that his course was correct. His methods began to alarm them. But even when they did, and he realized that he was making a bargain of a sort, he still believed in the premise that made a bargain necessary. Because many of his ideas and beliefs were also bound up with you, your work, your ideas, and his interpretations of them. Then your relationship became entwined. Initially, the beliefs were accepted because he had been taught to believe to fear his energy. On the other hand, it was his pride. Now, in another kind of lifestyle, with another kind of personality, the same belief might have been dispensed with easily. If energy flows in conventional accepted patterns, it is not feared. Give us a moment. He had, as you mentioned, the inner knowledge of his own abilities that had, he felt, to be used. After his first marriage, he determined, with the help of your love, to find a suitable framework. His natural abilities are unconventionally tuned, highly spontaneous, working through intuitive loops, in a certain way, now, from a normally conscious viewpoint, unpredictable. His nature then, on other levels, would follow the same pattern. He felt that his same quality, physically translated, led to a physical spontaneity that would make the inner spontaneity more difficult to achieve. Spontaneity and energy used in his work was one thing, but allowed physical translation, he felt, could mean bizarre, unreasonable physical complications. If he were as spontaneous physically as he was mentally, then his living situation could become unstable. In your early relationship, this could mean anything from sudden trips across country, an overactive social life, or even sexual attraction to men outside of marriage. Before you moved here, he felt that his energy had been too spontaneously used physically. He was then just over 30, and felt that his abilities had not begun to show fruition. The beliefs gathered momentum then, coming from structures from childhood that he felt he could use, and from new ideas which then were very much like his. There are other issues of which he has been lately somewhat aware, connected here. For example, in the beginning, the symptoms made certain that he would not have to get a job. That fear no longer operates. The belief as he wrote it alone was simply that to do his creative work, he had to curtail other activities. In the beginning, as an apprentice writer, this was to allow him to develop. When he found himself becoming an old nun after the tour, the symptoms, after having lifted to a large degree, returned with a vengeance, because then he was suddenly, to his way of thinking, besieged by distractions of a different kind. Then he was also afraid that this spontaneity and unconventionally attuned energy could be misdirected, again physically away from work. He could become, for example, a television personality. Rob noted, my note added later. I remember all of this well. How Jane got much worse as soon as we got back home from tour. RB, December 10th, 1980. They said he had greater temptations, so he applied more brakes. Now, your attitude and his interpretation of it, to him, clearly jibed. Such courses would also represent distractions to you. He thought you hated distractions, and for a period of time he felt that you thought him one. Since all of this made such sense to him, he did not change it, nor could he see beyond it. Until yesterday, he could not see himself apart from the system of beliefs. His writing seemed dependent upon the curtailment of activities of other kinds. Give us a moment. When the system was set up, for many reasons having to do with relative youth and lack of experience, he did not have any confidence in his conscious ability to say no, to hold to a line of attack. He was afraid he would be swept willy-nilly. He was also afraid, particularly when he tried teaching, that he might be led to give up and settle for another occupation that would bring automatic respectability, money, and some prestige. Give me a moment. I want to organize this so it makes sense to you, for other reasons. The fear of pregnancy, for example. Physical spontaneity was also suspect, and here again you were involved. Not that you consciously approved the methods used, but he had his situation and yours always in mind, and was convinced he was acting for both of your interests. Now, these are his interpretations, but whenever you rejected his spontaneous advances, for whatever reasons you may have had, this helped reinforce that idea. There was, my dear friend, little danger of Rubra becoming pregnant, when spontaneous passionate moments on both of your parts were cut out. You made love when it was safe to do so. Now, this involved tricks on both of your parts, to which you both agreed. The conscious material was there. You simply ignored it. You made sure you had a good reason not to make love when Robert spontaneously wanted to, and the same applied to him. In many areas then both of you controlled your spontaneity. For Robert, this had greater dangers than it did for you, because he is geared toward spontaneous action. Other issues would have subsidiary effects, or within the framework. For him, the writing abilities had to be allowed freedom. The psychic initiation actually united them. The early novels published would have led to another kind of personal problem, since all involved were living. He would still have had to face the world, so to speak. To be free to write freely, he had also to make a certain financial success, or he would need a job. With the dream book, he tried to do something he did not consider artistic and was unable to do it. He believed in the book's ideas, but the artistic framework for him was not right. When it was rejected, my book was developing. Finances were mixed up with freedom to write them. Give us time. He had schooled himself to believe that distractions of any kind had to be eliminated. This means that in writing a book, he withdrew, and more, physically speaking. It was his idea of training. The issues were also operating between you, as his paper on belief indicates. Do you want a break? Rob said, no. He also felt that you reacted to his improvement by feeling frightened yourself, that you disapproved of it. Two particular beliefs here, the party at Vegas and your tirade, his interpretation about his dealing with Prentice on one particular occasion. For reference, it is in his notebook. These two events made him poor in his homes, or rather, his interpretation of them in the light of your relationship. He always felt now, and work this out yourselves, that you focused upon the most negative aspects of his condition, and ignored any improvement as minute, but more, that you almost disapproved of them, that you expected him to be in poor shape, so he would hide any he felt from you, often for fear you would crush them, or make him lose whatever small confidence in himself physically he had gained. He then began to mistrust any improvements himself, and to think, so what? It has happened before, and to no overall advantage. When he did not then get even those small improvements that generated even small hope, he became truly frightened. Buying a house was in direct opposition to several other beliefs. The money from books gave him freedom to write more books, so to buy was afraid. At the same time, he wanted to move, though he has been more satisfied than you. The two difficulty arose because of the conflicts or wanting a new contract while thinking of spending money for a house. Also, his great difficulty physically. When you were looking at houses, he felt that you wanted one, but that you were refusing to do what you could do. Move to a rented place, and that did excite him. The symptoms became intensified. The two symptoms, however, brought up a system of beliefs through his writing, and he faced some of them quite directly in a crisis situation. He saw what could happen when beliefs are allowed to run astray, and he attacked some then quite directly and won out. The contract for my book, on a physical level, relieved him. The beliefs had built up then to such an extent that highly ritualized behavior was involved. He had to be at his desk at certain times immediately. Now that has vanished. He worked that through out of sheer desperation. The reason that he could not get rid of the symptoms was simply that he believed the necessary requirements to his work. The symptoms and the curtailment of activities were invisibly combined, so that he did not realize you could consciously set up a system in which you could work freely without distractions and be perfectly free to do whatever else you wanted otherwise. Until that distinction was seen, then he felt his writing dependent upon the symptoms. They were retained in order to maintain concentration, period. When a book was being produced, and afterward. These ideas were a part of his youth, and therefore nostalgically connected with it also. Give us a moment, and raise your hand. When you talk about people being insane, and point out the negative aspects of the race, Ruber becomes highly uncomfortable because to him this means he has to protect himself against them, and justifies his behavior. On the other hand, he becomes angry and frightened because it is precisely to protect himself against such people, activities, and events that he has tried to isolate himself. Hearing you voice the same opinions, he becomes mad at them or at you, for he knows that those reactions of yours helped him for his fear of the world, helped but are not responsible. Take a break, and we will continue if you are willing. Now, in one respect, Ruber is quite correct. You believe it is safe to express your doubts and negative aspects than to express your enthusiasms or hopes. If you did not know that Ruber could indeed manage to dance, though not in the widest fashion, then you would not believe it when faced with the reality of his behavior around the house. You would think he could not do it. Now, if he said under those conditions, I want to go out and dance, you would say, I don't want to make you feel bad, but I don't think you can manage it now. Maybe later you can. Now, when Ruber imaginatively saw the trainer, and so forth, Rob noted on our Sunday drive that weekend. They said and experienced that mobility in imagination. Your reaction was the same as the one used for my analogy above. In his way, he was using an accident procedure, and what you thought of as reminding him of the facts was instead inhibiting freedom. A bicycle has all kinds of connotations for him. It seems unreasonable, watching him, to think that he could even begin to ride one. Watching him, you would not think he could get to a dance floor, much less move. He mentioned adjusting the seat. You have been afraid to fix it, thinking he might hurt himself. That is another point, however, that is important. Give us a moment. You are to some degree, both of you, using the symptoms as excuses. Ruber is afraid that if he can operate in a trailer, and he can, that you will find yourselves losing work time, running all over the country, and you are afraid of the same thing. Any project the two of you are attracted to, but think will be distracting. You blame on the symptoms. Since this is never challenged, you never know whether or not Ruber can perform. You say that when my book is finished, you will move, yet each of you through the years has said, when this book is finished, we will move. Move or not, you must be consciously aware of your beliefs and deal with them on that level. Now, Rupert's coming back in here. Ralph noted. Apartment 5. They said, represented a willingness to face beliefs, to come out into the open, so to speak, with you and with the world. Symbolic interpretations immediately became obvious, and yet brought out into the open, as in tonight's episode. I do not want to duplicate material, but Rupert's seeing you walking without symptoms was of great benefit. Your reaction then to the noise was upsetting, which is quite all right, because now your reactions there can be consciously assimilated. Your reaction is to yell about the condition, yet you do not move. His has been to say little and to withdraw. Though your particular interpretations of distractions may vary, to him the noise itself, for example, is not so charged. But quite rightly, he recognizes the noise as your symbol for distraction. Gradually, his belief system led to more restrictive behavior, even to some extent impeding inner flow. The psychic was suspect in the beginning, as it seemed to conflict with his writing ideas. This was largely cleared through my books and 7. Letters and calls were interpreted as distractions mainly, as another pull upon his energies. He recognizes the psychic source of his writing, which cleared the psychic area in that respect. Finally, but he was afraid that the spontaneity denied in physical life would run rampant now in inner psychic experience. The sex was denied on a physical level to a large extent. As he read so-called psychic books, much of this is based on the youthful feeling he had to direct his energy toward his work. He found his physical age frightening for a while, and was therefore not able to use the experience gained with age. To give up the youthful ideas was to admit that he was no longer the young writer. To let these ideas go was to let his youth go, and to admit that many of those ideas, believed in so strongly and so stubbornly, were not working any longer. Even your remark about a black-haired wife meant the image of a woman in her 20s. The younger than you obviously youthful, spontaneous and cute wife. Not a 15-year-old woman with experience behind her, some sense, and who could stand on her own feet, but a much younger version, youthful enough to get into trouble and to be humorously watched in that regard. Give us a moment. You can see where in many regards your beliefs drived, interacted, and yet you have lately both concentrated on the negative aspects, and this is one of your difficulties, each of you. When you do so, the problem is all, and it blasts out everything else. The more you concentrate on it as the problem in order to get rid of it, the more you blot out other aspects of experience that could help you solve it. Now, from the rich bed of creative imagination springs the physical facts that appear within your lives. Rupert's imaginative endeavor with the trailer, for example, represents the kind of activity that is far more productive than any attempt to face the terrible conditions that could result if the situation is not solved. When he thinks in such terms, he sees an old woman, crippled and alone, incapacitated in a home, and the fear brings a feeling of powerlessness, not one of strength. The beliefs mentioned added up to beliefs on a physical level, so that Rupert believed that his arms and legs could not straighten out, that he could not physically walk well. Finally, it came to that, where earlier he believed he could reverse the process. Now he is at a point where he is beginning to believe he can indeed reverse the process. The point of power is in the present. You must believe it, regardless of what has happened in the past, in your terms. This applies most personally. Improvements can begin and continue in this present. The ideas in Ruber's paper tonight are important. Working nights or early mornings is a kind of solution and a method of illumination in which he is forced to make conscious decisions. It is a way of consciously deciding to operate, to cut out distractions. It shows him there are alternatives and will automatically make him think of others. Seeing you work, as these last few days, instantly made him see other alternatives in which the same ends are met, but without cutting down on physical flexibility. The most seemingly impractical ideas, imaginatively considered, may be precisely the most practical in greater terms. Your expectations must be changed, and despite what so-called practical experience shows you, that is why a puny weakling who cannot lift a sack of groceries may certainly find himself holding up a car so a child can escape. Practically, in the light of the man's experience, such an activity would seem impossible. You have been looking, both of you, to see how bad Ruber was, how much worse he would get, until each of you projected the situation into the future, until he was nearly bedridden, all in a misguided attempt to get yourselves out of the situation. In the light of that picture, improvement was not reasonable, not to be expected. What was projected finally, however, was your complete statement that you no longer agreed with the methods, that you would no longer go along with them, and this was to the good. Up until now, Ruber felt and believed that despite the unfortunate aspects you were willing to go along. He felt you were not willing on your own to face some issues on a conscious level, and as he grew more frightened, he felt that you were willing to let him do this for both of you while you were accusing him because of the symptoms. Now, that is enough for tonight. If you have questions, I will answer them. Ralph said, no. They said, my heartiest good wishes then. Ralph said, thank you, Seth. Good night. They said, as probabilities operate in each moment of your life, there are minute improvements in Ruber's condition and minute backslidings, possessions, rarely of reactions. Now, if you concentrate upon the improvements with this understanding that facts grow from that creativity, then you begin to structure your attention in the light of those improvements, minute as they appear, and they grow, sometimes slowly, or by leaps and bounds, and the backslidings begin to disappear, and become less and less apparent or meaningful. If instead you structure your attention upon each backsliding, minute as it might appear, then the improvements seem to become meaningless and less apparent until they seem to disappear. You have your choice. I believe you have the information to put it to use, and if it does you any good to know it, and it should, I am highly optimistic. Ralph said, thank you.